can hear it before I see it. The low, rolling thunder of its feet shaking the ground. The mammoth is close. Close enough that I can feel the tremble through the soil, up my knees, and into the handle of my spear. I crouch lower in the grass, wind in my face, breath shallow. The chill cuts through my bones, but I barely notice. All I feel is the blood pounding in my ears, the ache of my thighs, and the weight of the stone point gripped tightly in my hand. I shaped it myself. 2 days of chipping, grinding, fluting. It's sharp enough to kill a god. We've been tracking this bull for 4 days, across frozen rivers, past broken trees, through wide-out snow and blackwater marsh. My legs scream. My throat is raw. My stomach's been empty since yesterday, but I can smell the end now. We're too close to stop. I glance to the left. My brother is there, half hidden behind a boulder, spear resting against his thigh. He doesn't look at me, just nods. No words, no signal. We've done this before. The mammoth crests the ridge, steam rising off its back like smoke from a morning fire. Its huge tusks, curved like moons, swaying with each step, a walking mountain of meat and bone. It doesn't know we're here. Not yet. So we wait. The others are already in place. 2 behind it, 1 to the north draw, its only path of escape. Koya, the elder, is further back with the fire pit. If this works, we'll be feasting by nightfall. And if it doesn't, there's no second chance with a bull this size. 1 bad throw, 1 wrong step, and my ancestors would tell stories by firelight about my bones. The mammoth lowers its head to graze. Its ears twitch. It's heard something. I freeze. The wind shifts. It lifts its head, snorting. It smells us. It bellows a deep, thunderous roar that echoes off the canyon walls. I watch it turn, slow, uncertain. Its eye catches the sun, just for a moment. I raise my arm, and I run. Hey y'all, I'm Jody Slaughter, and welcome back to West Texas, where the stories stretch as wide as the sky and the land's been keeping secrets longer than any of us have been around to listen. Now today we're going to start at the very beginning, and I don't mean the beginning of cowboy stories or Comanche raids. I mean the beginning. Before the first human foot stepped onto the Llano Estacado, before the great herds roamed, before the rivers carved their canyons, before the very Caprock stood sentinel. We'll come face to face with Columbian mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and American lions, each once king of these plains. And we're going to go back to when the land wasn't even land yet. Now, a few short notes before we begin. First, I've tried to divide things into a neat, ordered timeline, but keep in mind that many of these things didn't happen neatly one after the other. They overlapped, and the changes that happened didn't happen overnight. They took hundreds or thousands or even millions of years. So I've tried to keep things as accurate as possible while also making it coherent to the non-geologist, non-paleontologist, non-archaeologist. If you are one of those, you're probably going to be yelling at your device while streaming this, so for that I apologize in advance. The periods of time here are impossible for our brains to really comprehend, so I'm going to borrow the well-worn calendar framework. So imagine Texas and presumably the Earth were created on January 1st of our pretend calendar. Now, wherever you sit now in 2025 or later, that's 12 months later at the end of December, New Year's Eve. Everything that has ever happened has happened within the 12 months of our fictitious calendar year. So with that out of the way, as always, sit back, relax, kick off your boots, and settle in. Because this is West Texas. Now, our West Texas story doesn't even begin until December 8th of our fictitious year, about 280 million years ago, during the Permian period, a a time even before dinosaurs. Back then, West Texas sat on the edge of a vast inland sea, a shallow, warm body of water teeming with ancient life, coral reefs, fast-swimming squid with shells, and strange fish with armor-plated heads. Think of the Bahamas for a modern comparison. And as millions of years rolled by, that sea filled up with the remains of everything that lived and died in it. Skeletons, shells, plant matter, all sank to the bottom and were slowly buried under layers and layers of sediment over millions and millions of years. So, right beneath your boots, if you're standing anywhere between Midland, Odessa, and the Guadalupe Mountains, is a sunken geological bowl that was created during this time that we call the Permian Basin. All of those layers of dead sea life, algae, plankton, sponges, coral, were compressed over time by heat and pressure until they turned into a new kind of ocean, a fossilized subterranean ocean of oil and gas, created by time and geology, just waiting to be discovered and exploited to power our world. Thanks, little fishies. The earliest written accounts of the southern high plains compared the land to a vast sea. And as you just heard, it once was. But today, only traces of those shores remain. The ghost of an ancient coast. At the Ghost Coast Surf Company, from the capital of the Llano Estacado, you'll find just what you'd expect from the surf shop of the plains. Hats, hoodies, and shirts, which, as near as they can tell, is all any surf brand really does anyway. For a special discount, subscribe to their newsletter, the Ghost Coast Surf Report, and never miss the waves on the plains. Out here, surf is what you make it. Check them out at ghostcoastsurf.com. Around December 13th, tectonic plates started shifting and sea levels dropped. And the Permian Sea drained. No longer drowned beneath salt water, the surface of West Texas cracked, hardened, and baked under a sun that had never touched it before. During the Triassic, West Texas was a land of extremes, hot, dusty, and dry for most of the year, more like Australia's outback. But when the rains came, they didn't just fall, they gushed from the sky unceasing. Flash floods carved shallow rivers through wide floodplains, and for a little while, pockets of water pooled into muddy wetlands where amphibians wallowed and reptiles hunted along the banks. The fossils of several small carnivores and scavengers, not much larger than a man, have been discovered at a quarry near Post. The aptly named Postosuchus, Coelophysis, Shuvosaurus, and Technosaurus, named not because of his sick DJ skills, but after our very own Texas Tech University. As the Triassic turned to the Jurassic around December 17th, the land changed again. Rivers began to cut across the land. The barren desert transformed into a tropical wetland. Ferns and cycads rose like green spines from the dust, and from the shadows, bigger animals came, heavier, hungrier, thundering across riverbeds and stream banks. Sauropods longer than school buses wandered through the shallows, while carnivores with jagged teeth stalked them in the night. Now, we don't have the full fossil record here, not like Utah or Montana, but the bones that have been found, many not far from the Caprock, tell us that we had giants too. The 30-foot-tall Allosaurus, smaller predators like Dilophosaurus, which coincidentally was larger and looked nothing like the dinosaur in Jurassic Park. Tenontosaurs and early horned dinosaurs grazed in herds, and above it all, great pterosaurs with their 40-foot wingspans coasted silently overhead. This tropical age lasted for another 100 million years. The land held storms, fire, and extinction. And then, just as the dinosaurs were reaching their golden age, the water came back. But the waters that came around December 22nd wasn't the shallow Permian Sea of before. This was something new, bigger, deeper, stranger. a Cretaceous sea that didn't just lap at the edges of Texas, it swallowed the middle of the continent whole. This was the Western Interior Seaway, and it stretched from the Arctic Ocean all the way down to the Gulf. Picture a body of water wider than the Mediterranean, cutting clean across North America. Where Kansas is now, underwater. Nebraska, gone. And yes, even large parts of West Texas, including the eastern Llano Estacado, the rolling plains, and parts of the Panhandle, all beneath the waves. And it wasn't just wet, it was hot, humid, tropical. No ice at the poles meant sea levels were way up. If you want a modern comparison, think the coast of Belize or the mangrove shallows of southern Vietnam, only with monsters gliding just under the surface. Below the waves, the sea teemed with life. There were mosasaurs, marine reptiles the size of buses with double-hinged jaws and flippers like torpedoes. Plesiosaurs, long-necked and paddle-limbed like the mythic Loch Ness monster, moved underwater like ballerinas. There was Xiphactinus, a 15-foot fang-toothed fish who swallowed other fish whole, sometimes so fast it died with its prey half digested. There were ancient sharks, coiled ammonites, giant squid, and toothed seabirds diving deep for prey. There may have still been patches of land rising above the water, small islands, spits of coastal marsh, and on those tiny little scraps of dry ground, you'd find the last of the dinosaurs. Hadrosaurs, duck-billed and herd-bound, ankylosaurs, covered in armor, and quick-footed raptors, sharp-eyed and clever, waiting in the palms. But it wouldn't last. Because one day, about 66 million years ago, we'll call that Christmas Day in our calendar year, something appeared in the sky. A speck at first, too small to notice, too fast to matter. But that speck was a mountain-sized asteroid, 6 miles wide, screaming through space at more than 40,000 miles per hour. And it was headed straight for Earth. It hit near what's now the Yucatan Peninsula, and in the blink of a geologic eye, the world changed. The blast was so powerful it vaporized the Gulf, shook the crust of the Earth, and sent a wall of water thousands of feet high, racing in every direction. Molten rock rained from the sky, dust and ash blotted out the sun. The forests burned, the dinosaurs fell silent. By the time the dust settled, 3 out of every 4 species on Earth were gone. West Texas, once a warm tropical sea, was now drying out. The land rose, and in the quiet that followed, the survivors, tiny mammals, birds, and lizards, emerged into a brand new world. Erosion began carving mesas and gulches. Volcanoes out west belched ash and lava, adding more layers to the Earth's crust. But here's where the Llano Estacado started becoming something special. The story of the Llano Estacado itself, that wide, flat tabletop of land, begins December 30th with runoff. It took 10 million years of rivers and flash floods rushing off the eastern face of the Rocky Mountains, dumping gravel, sand, and silt across what's now eastern New Mexico and the Texas High Plains. These materials didn't settle like mud, though. They stacked loosely with gaps between the grains. Think of it like a giant sandbox, 1,000 feet thick, with water trickling down into all the empty spaces. That's how the Ogallala Formation was born. As rainwater and melted snow filtered through the soil, it got trapped in these layers of gravel and sand. And that created one of the largest underground lakes in the world, the Ogallala Aquifer. It's not just a pool, it's a buried sponge stretching from South Dakota all the way down to the Permian Basin. Before being tapped for irrigation, the Ogallala contains some 900 trillion gallons of water. That's enough to cover all of Texas in water 17 feet deep. Then, in just the last 1 to 2 million years, as rain and rivers eroded the edges, the striking Caprock escarpment was formed, the steep cliffs synonymous with the region today. About 2.6 million years ago, the Ice Age rolled in. Now, the glaciers didn't reach this far south, but the climate shifted. It got cooler, wetter. Grasslands spread across the plains, and small rivers like the White River and Brazos trickled through the canyons. And then came the animals. The Llano Estacado was a prehistoric safari, home to some of the most incredible beasts to ever walk North America. Columbian mammoths, towering elephants with tusks the size of church pews, huge armadillos, and giant ground sloths as big as oxen lumbered over the plains. American lions, even larger than today's African lions, massive dire wolves with bone-crushing jaws, and stealthy saber-toothed cats prowled the canyons and grasslands. The world's first camels actually evolved here in North America before spreading to Asia and Africa. We even had small horses, not much larger than sheep. They would go extinct before modern horses were reintroduced by European explorers. Now you might be wondering, where are the people? Well, we, Homo sapiens, first showed up in East Africa around 300,000 years ago. We were hunters, gatherers, travelers, and we didn't stay put for long. Wave by wave, generation by generation, early humans walked out of Africa, into the Middle East, across Asia, and eventually north into Siberia. Then sometime around 20,000 years ago, during the last ice age, sea levels dropped. A land bridge opened up between Russia and Alaska. And that's how people reached North America, on foot, walking across a frozen plain that's now buried beneath the Bering Sea. And they didn't stay in the Arctic. They followed rivers, followed game, followed curiosity southward, then east. Across centuries, some of them made their way into the Southwest. They'd set up camp in places like Blackwater Draw near modern-day Clovis, New Mexico, and at a spring-fed spot that today we call Lubbock Lake Landmark. These watering holes were frequented by game. The first evidence of humans in the area appeared around 12,000 years ago, so let's reset the scale of our calendar from a year down to a day. And we're going to say that the first humans are stepping foot on West Texas soil at midnight as the day opens. These Paleo Indians walked down from Alaska through Ice Age glaciers that extended as far south as Kansas, and when they found West Texas, they must have thought it was paradise. Tall grasses, tons of water, and plentiful game. Having only the most primitive tools and weapons, stone knives, spears, and lances, they favored catching young mammoths and mastodon instead of trying to take down their full-size parents. They hunted an extinct bison species with straight horns around a third larger than modern bison, and they were likely hunted themselves by the lions, dire wolves, and saber-toothed cats of the plains. They supplemented their diets by gathering turnips and mesquite beans, or hunting smaller game like the geese, ducks, turkeys, and rabbits that still live here today. By 1 a.m., 11,500 years ago, they'd established a unique culture of their own. These were the Clovis peoples, and they dominated the region for hundreds of years. On the Llano, the Clovis hunters crouched in dripping marshes, moss-slick stones underfoot, tracking mammoths. They chased them across the prairie, read their footprints like stories in the dirt, and struck when the time was right. A single mammoth kill meant weeks of food, shelter, tools, and fire. Nothing went to waste. But it was never easy. Imagine standing on the open plain, armed with nothing but a spear, facing down an animal the size of a small house. You don't get a second chance. You either hit your mark or you run. And if you run too slow, you don't get to tell the story. But they weren't just hunters, they were parents, storytellers, fire builders. They roasted prairie dogs, gathered mesquite beans, and picked prickly pears with careful fingers. They sang songs no one remembers. They buried their dead with offerings. They lived with the land, not just on top of it. And for a time, maybe 500 years, they were the most successful people on Earth. But nothing lasts forever. As the Ice Age melted away, the climate changed. Grasslands shrank, watering holes dried up. The lush, humid climate the Clovis people had first encountered turned to an arid, almost desert-like land, similar to the Trans-Pecos today. The mammoths, giant ground sloths, horses, and other Ice Age herbivores couldn't adapt. They disappeared, and along with them, the larger carnivores that preyed on them. One by one, the great herds disappeared until the Clovis had nothing left to chase, and the prairies fell silent. And out of that silence came a new people, smaller, quieter, smarter. The Folsom culture emerged at 2:24 a.m. around 10,800 years ago, built on a new reality. The age of giants was over. No more mammoths, no more mastodons. What remained was the bison antiquus, a massive sharp-horned ancestor of today's buffalo. Still dangerous, but still worth the risk. The Folsom refined their hunting techniques. Their spear points were thinner, more delicate, fluted with astonishing precision. These weren't brute weapons, these were surgical. And their hunts, tactical, coordinated. A single mistake could cost the whole band their food for the winter. But when it worked, when they brought down an entire herd, it must have felt like magic, like power over nature itself. We found their camps too, at places like Lubbock Lake Landmark and Blackwater Draw. Fire rings, flakes of stone, butchered bones, and in 1953, just outside Midland, a skeleton. A young woman buried more than 10,000 years ago. She's known today as Midland Man, even though we now know she wasn't a man at all. She might have been a mother, a daughter, a storyteller. Hers are some of the oldest human remains ever found in Texas. But even the Folsom couldn't outrun time. Soon as the Ice Age continued to recede, the land became more barren, and eventually the last of the great bison were gone. Whether it was from climate or overhunting, it didn't much matter to the Folsom. And just like the Clovis before them, the Folsom's centuries-long reign came to an end. By 4 a.m., around 10,000 years ago, the Folsom had been replaced by a number of regional cultures, with names like Plainview, First View, and Plano. These cultures were distinct, but they also overlapped in time and geography. They were still hunter-gatherers, but with a much larger emphasis on the gathering, mainly subsisting on roots, nuts, berries, and other forage. Just as the sun began to rise on our imaginary day, the First View culture was making their mark upon the West Texas sands. They would thrive for 1,000 years. The Plainview culture, 4:20 a.m. to almost 10 a.m., 5100 BC, was the most developed of this era. They moved in larger bands, began developing the seeds of socio-political societies, and even developed an innovative way to preserve meat. Plainview women dried small strips of meat in the sun and then pounded it into a slurry with berries and animal fat, and then packed it into skin bags that were sealed with even more fat. They called this pemmican, and it could last for years without spoiling. We don't know a lot about the next groups of people who lived here, except that they proved more adaptable than their predecessors. When times got hard, they sharpened their tools, reshaped their habits, and paid closer attention to the land. At places like the Alabates flint quarries near today's Lake Meredith, they chipped away at stone beds streaked with color, choosing only the finest blades of chert to make the tools that would feed their families. The bison changed too. Gone were the lumbering Ice Age herds. These new bison were quicker, leaner, built for speed and drought, and the hunters adapted right along with them. They learned how to turn the land itself into a weapon, herding bison into narrow draws or driving them off of cliffs in carefully timed stampedes. You can almost hear it, the pounding hooves, the shouted signals, the silence that followed. But for all their brilliance and resilience, these people didn't have it easy. They endured one of the longest droughts in human memory, nearly 2,000 years, from around lunchtime all the way to mid-afternoon in our imaginary day. The high plains was seared by sun and scoured by wind. Springs dried up, grass turned brittle and lost its nourishment. Blowing dust turned day to night. This was the land learning how to be West Texas. Many of the people left the area, perhaps most did, but some stayed. And those who did learned how to be West Texans. They crouched beside dry creek beds, digging for moisture. They waited for cactus fruit to ripen. They crushed mesquite beans on stone slabs until their hands blistered. And when a jackrabbit darted from the brush, they ran, not for sport, but for supper. There were no pyramids here, no stone circles or cities, but there was love. There were parents teaching their children how to stitch a hide tight against the wind. There were stories told by firelight about storms, animals, and ancestors. There was laughter and hunger and heartbreak. And there was a deep understanding that survival here meant knowing the land, not conquering it. While the rest of the world at this time raised temples and carved their names into stone, the people of West Texas did something just as remarkable. They endured. While they scraped out survival, the rest of the world was building wonders. In Sumeria, they were writing in cuneiform, setting laws and raising temples to the heavens. In Egypt, the first great pyramids were taking shape under the rule of divine kings. In the Indus Valley, cities like Mohenjo-Daro were laid out in perfect grids with drainage systems more advanced than some towns today. Stonehenge was going up in the misty fields of England. Governments, religions, and great armies were being built. And in a few great cities, up to 50,000 people gathered in one place, fed by rivers and harvest and centuries of accumulated knowledge. But here on the Llano, it was still just stone tools, sweat, and survival. No temples, no kings, no writing, just dust and wind and the people who refused to leave. So much dirt blew during this 2,000-year period that when the Santa Fe Railroad built their line from Plainview to Lubbock in the early 1900s, they had to drive bridge supports across the Yellow House and Blackwater Draws through 100 feet of dirt and sand just to reach the old river bottom. That's how much sand had accumulated. Eventually, mercifully, the skies shifted, the winds calmed, rains returned. Slowly, then steadily, springs that had been dry for generations began to trickle again. Grasses crept back across the prairie, and with them, back came the bison. And the bison didn't come alone. The people came back too. You can imagine your relief standing beside a clear running spring after 2,000 years of thirst to see grass tall enough to hide a calf, to hear the grunt of bison rolling like thunder across the flats. Now for the first time, hides weren't just for warmth, they were for homes. With new tools like stone drills and awls, people could pierce the thick skins and stitch them together into weatherproof shelters. Teepees took shape across the plains, sturdy and mobile, made to follow the herds. But teepees are heavy, and there were no horses yet, so they turned to an old companion, dogs. Now, dogs had crossed the land bridge with humans millennia earlier, first as guards and scouts, then as family. But now they took on a new role, haulers. Harnessed to travois sleds, these early pack animals helped carry hides, supplies, and children across the plains. This was a quiet revolution, not of stone monuments or metal tools, but of small inventions that changed daily life. And over time, those small changes stacked up. At 8 p.m., about 2,000 years ago, another shift took place. People began to settle, at least part-time. They started to grow things, squash, beans, maybe even corn, in small garden plots tucked near dependable water. They even experimented with storage, baskets first, then clay pots, hardened in open fires. The ceramic period had begun. Pottery here wasn't flashy, no painted symbols, no polished glazes, just thick-walled brownware vessels, simple, durable, life-changing. For the first time, people could boil food, store water, and preserve seeds. A broken shard in the dirt may not look like much today, but back then it meant stability. It meant a little more time between harvest and hunger. They were no longer just surviving until tomorrow. For the first time, they were planning for the future. And while families on the Llano were boiling roots and drying meat, halfway across the world, cities were rising. The Roman Empire had already peaked and declined. In India, the Gupta philosophers debated math and medicine. In Mesoamerica, the Maya were carving kings' names into stone, and building temples tall enough to kiss the sky. In China, artisans were glazing early porcelain and scribes were copying poetry onto silk scrolls. And out here, someone sat by the fire, sealing up a clay jar with mud and ash. Someone stitched a bison robe while their child slept under the stars. Someone knelt beside a stream, cupping water to their lips, thinking not of kings or conquest, but of the hunt, the season, what tomorrow might bring. It was also during this period, somewhere between 250 and 400 AD, 8:30 p.m., that the bow and arrow was first adopted. Soon, no self-respecting bison hunter would be caught without one. Then around 9:45 p.m., 900 AD, something changed in the sky. The medieval warm period was a global warming trend expanding across Western Europe and into North America. And it caused a civilizational boom on both continents. In Europe, agricultural yields increased, and along with them, the size of cities. Great Gothic cathedrals were built. The Reformation took place. The massive pyramids of Central America were built. Farming communities like the Pueblos of New Mexico flourished. Here in West Texas, the warmth brought a new life to the southern plains. And out of the Paladura Canyon, a new culture blossomed. These early people, centered in the Upper Red River and Brazos watersheds, didn't chase bison the way their ancestors had. The big herds had moved off to escape the heat, so they turned instead to deer and pronghorn and leaned into horticulture. The Paladura people grew gardens, built storage pits, cooked in pit ovens. They read the seasons, watched the sky, and scratched a living from the soil. But by 1200 AD, the Paladura culture, too, had faded into memory, making way for something bigger. A new force emerged on the high plains, the Antelope Creek culture. From the Canadian River all the way down into modern-day Briscoe, Swisher, and Castro counties, they built permanent stone and adobe villages, some with multi-room houses, even underground storage chambers. Corn, beans, squash, and sunflowers filled their gardens. They mined the famed Alabatis flint and traded it to the west to the Pueblo cultures of New Mexico. The high plains weren't just inhabited now, they were connected. But as always on the Llano, good times don't last. After 1400, 10:45 p.m., the warming trend snapped. The climate turned cold. Again. A little ice age gripped the world. Crops failed, famine spread, snow fell deeper, seasons grew shorter. Even the bison, tough as they were, retreated south, some as far as the Gulf, if you can believe it. And from the north came another threat. Not the cold, the Proto-Apaches. These early ancestors of the Apache tribes that would come later weren't farmers. These were raiders, warriors, hunters, born in war. They descended in bands, lean, fast, and brutal, pillaging the Antelope Creek villages with swift, coordinated strikes. Stone houses couldn't protect a people armed with garden tools from warriors trained since childhood to kill. The Antelope Creek people vanished. We don't know where they went. Maybe they fled north and joined the Pawnees. Maybe they were absorbed by other cultures to the west. Maybe they were wiped out entirely. What we do know is this: they were here, and then they weren't. And that's where we pick up our first written records of West Texas. It wasn't until 1541, 11 p.m. in our day, that the first Europeans in any numbers arrived on the Texas plains, when Coronado marched his Spanish expedition across the Caprock in search of cities of gold. Much more on them in the next episode. What Coronado found instead were the Carachos, a mobile bison-hunting Apache group living in teepee villages atop the Caprock. They didn't farm, they didn't build towns, they followed the herds. Further south near what's now Toole Canyon, Coronado met another group, the Tejas. They were different. They planted crops, lived in more permanent villages, and spent part of the year hunting bison. They were sworn enemies of the Carachos and may have been related to the Jumano peoples of the Trans-Pecos or possibly the Caddo from East Texas. Fun fact, the Tejas tribe is actually where the word Texas came from. Another Apache group, whom the Spanish called the Vaqueros, lived further north along the tributaries of the Red River. They now controlled the Alabate's flint quarries and continued to trade those with the Pueblos to the west. Other Tejas-like peoples were encountered in Blanco Canyon in present-day Crosby County. But the real game changer was the thing Coronado brought with him, the horse. Until now, bison hunts had been limited by human legs, but a horse could run for miles. A horse could carry hides, food, warriors, weapons. The horse changed everything. Now, tribes weren't just eking out an existence on the plains, they were racing across them, raiding, retaliating, expanding, raiding again. And it wasn't just horses. The Europeans brought iron, gunpowder, metal blades. Technology that would have taken native cultures centuries to develop was dropped in their lap almost overnight. For a comparison, imagine if a time traveler had shown up in 1776 with tanks and M16s. That's the leap forward that these people on the plains took technologically. Now they had speed, they had steel, they had fire. Those who adapted to this new world quickly became unstoppable. Those who didn't disappeared. And no one adapted faster than the Lipan Apache, a successor to the Querecho and Vaqueros. By 1600, they controlled large parts of West Texas, down to modern San Antonio and even into Mexico. They controlled the lucrative bison trade with the Spanish in New Mexico. They were terrifying in battle. The men had long hair, tattoos, war paint. They rode to battle almost naked. Grandfathers trained their grandsons in hunting and fighting while the men were away. The youth were taught an elaborate set of customs in the sacred compact that existed between a hunter and his prey. And the Apache women enjoyed a respect and equality seen almost nowhere else in the world at that time. They participated in occasional hunts, and while the men were gone, sometimes for weeks, they were empowered to make all decisions for the tribe. They also learned prairie medicine and were given the task of butchering meat, preparing hides, and trading those with others. By the year 1700, 11:15 p.m., the Lipan Apache had become the dominant power in Texas, over 4,000 strong. They were the kings of the Caprock, and for a time, no one could touch them. Thanks for listening to the first episode of the second season of the WTX podcast. I've been Jody Slaughter. I'm so excited to get back into the swing of things, so look forward to an exciting second season. In the next episode or two, depending on how it shakes out, we'll dive deeper into the early Europeans who first laid eyes on the area before introducing the feared Comanche. You won't want to miss that. You know, one thing that struck me when researching this is the only constant that we've had here in West Texas throughout the eons is change. And that change continues today. Whether we realize it or not on human scales, everything is still changing. And if you've taken anything away from this, I hope you take away that the people who make it out here are the ones who adapt. Crops come and go, animals come and go, the technology comes and goes, the jobs that someone can make a living doing up here come and go. But the ones who pass on their bloodline to the next generation are the ones that choose to adapt and be resilient. And the ones that cling to their old way of life stubbornly, they're not here anymore. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll definitely want to check out Paul H. Carlson's fantastic book, Heaven's Harsh Tableland, A New History of the Llano Estacado. It's a really great read. It goes way more in depth on many of these topics, so please pick that one up. It's a good one. As always, you can email me at lubbicist@gmail.com with any questions or comments, or reach out to me on Twitter at Lubbicist, that's LUBBOCKIST. Visit WTXpodcast.com for photos, maps, and tons of additional info related to each episode. This episode was written, produced, edited, and mixed by me, Jody Slaughter. Original music is performed by my AI band, Gentry Ford and the Homeless Lobos. You can find more from them on Spotify or wherever you stream music. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of this journey across time and West Texas with me. We'll see you next time, but for now, so long. from West Texas.
Argue about where West Texas begins. Some think it's Fort Worth, somewhere near the cattle pens. Some think it's I-35 packed with Fords and Chevrolets. Others think it's where the oak trees start to fade to sand and clay. Straight once and for all. It's all West Texas. It's all West Texas. Whether you're surrounded by John Deere's or Lexus, congrats, you're in West Texas. And Pecos Valley purists think they've got the winning hand, but they ain't gonna paint me as some Eastern Yankee man. It's all West Texas. It's all West Texas. Whether you're surrounded by John Deere's or Lexus, congrats, you're in West Texas. Seattle, Springfield, Chicago, Manhattan, Miami, Toronto.